The first system didn't send a distress signal. It simply stopped responding. No explosion, no debris, no radiation spike, just silence. At first, Command thought it was a communication failure. Systems glitch. Relay collapse. It happened sometimes on the outer edges of map space. But then the second system went dark, and the third, and the fourth, each one disappearing with the same impossible signature. No battle, no warning, no survivors. By the time the pattern was recognized, it was already too late to contain. Whatever was coming didn't attack the way wars were supposed to be fought. It didn't overwhelm defenses or bombard planets. It erased control. Fleets sent to investigate didn't report combat. They reported confusion. Orders stopped making sense. Targeting systems contradicted themselves. Entire formations drifted out of sync, as if the very logic of war had begun to fail. And then those fleets vanished too. The Council chamber had seen conflicts before. Thousands of them. Civil wars, expansions, collapses, rebellions. There were protocols for all of it. There were no protocols for this. A projection filled the chamber's central void, a map of known space, pulsing with life just days ago. Now, sections of it were dimming one by one, not violently, not dramatically, quietly, like lights being turned off in a room no one could enter. They're not destroying us, one strategist said, his voice barely holding together. They're removing us. No one corrected him, because no one had a better explanation. Simulations had been run. Hundreds, thousands. Every possible strategy tested against the data they had. None of them ended with survival. Not victory. Not stalemate. Survival. The conclusion came back the same every time. Time remaining. Limited. Outcome. Extinction. That was when someone said the word no one had want to say. Humanity. The chamber shifted, not loudly, but enough to feel it. They had been members for centuries. Observers. Contributors. Quiet. Always present. Rarely involved. They had resources. Technology. But when war came, they never committed. They watched. They won't answer. Another voice said, they never have. A pause. Then the response, colder than the rest. Then we asked differently. The transmission that followed was not a request for aid. It was a confession. We cannot win. We cannot adapt. We cannot survive without you. For the first time in recorded history, the Council did not negotiate. They begged. The message was encoded across every channel, every known protocol, every diplomatic standard humanity had ever recognized. And then they waited. Not days, not hours, minutes. The reply arrived before the chamber had time to breathe again. No greeting, no signature, no explanation, just a single line. Received. Asset deployed. Arrival, 19 hours. Silence returned to the chamber. But it was different now. Heavier. What asset? Someone finally asked. No one answered, because the message contained nothing else. No fleet designation. No reinforcements. No numbers. Just one deployment. 19 hours later, long-range sensors detected something entering known space. One signal. One object. No escort. No fleet. No formation. Just a single, unidentified construct moving directly toward the advancing collapse. And for the first time since the systems began going dark, the simulation stopped returning outcomes. They returned errors. The chamber did not erupt after the message arrived. It fractured, not into chaos, but into something colder, controlled disagreement. The kind that happens when no one wants to admit what they're thinking, but no one can ignore it either. Clarification must be requested. One of the senior tacticians insisted. This could be a translation compression issue. Asset may refer to a fleet designation. It doesn't, another interrupted. We ran linguistic cross-references. Every human military archive we have. Asset is singular when used this way. A pause. Then they misunderstood. No, came a quieter voice from the analysis tier. They didn't. That shifted the room. Because it wasn't speculation. It was data. Every previous interaction with humanity, every negotiation, Every joint operation, every observer report, pointed to the same conclusion. Humans were precise communicators when they chose to be. They didn't make mistakes like this. If they sent one, they meant one. They received the full strategic packet. The analyst continued. All projections, all losses, all failure scenarios. They know the scale of the threat. And still send a single unit? Someone asked. Yes. Silence again. But now it had shape. The countdown began to matter after that. 19 hours had sounded short at first. Now it felt impossibly long, because the collapse didn't stop. Another system went dark 3 hours after the message. This time they had live data. A fleet had been positioned there, one of the last intact formations, fully prepared, defensive grids aligned, command structure stable. For 17 seconds, everything looked normal. Then the command hierarchy broke. Orders looped. Counterorders overwrote them. Targeting systems began identifying Allied ships as threats, then correcting themselves, then correcting again, faster and faster, until nothing was consistent. They're not attacking the ships, the tactical observer said, watching the feed degrade in real time. They're attacking the decision layer, and then the feed cut. Gone. No explosion. No survivors. Just absence. Update on the incoming object, the council demanded. The sense of division hesitated. That was new. Report, the chamber insisted. We don't have a classification. You always have a classification. Not this time. The display shifted, pulling data from long-range arrays, tracking the inbound signal. At first glance, it looked simple. A single object, linear trajectory, constant velocity. But the deeper scans told a different story. It's not matching any propulsion model we recognize, the lead analyst said slowly. It's not accelerating in a conventional sense. It's repositioning. Explain. It's occupying sequential points in space without measurable transition. A pause. That's not movement. No, the analyst agreed. It isn't. The room felt smaller. More data came in. The object wasn't broadcasting identification codes. Not unusual in a combat environment, but it also wasn't masking them. It simply wasn't there. No emissions consistent with communication. No active defense grid. No visible weapon systems. It looks unarmed, someone said. No, another corrected. It looks like we're not allowed to see how it's armed. That distinction mattered. Hours passed. Another system went dark. Then another. The map no longer dimmed in isolated points. It began to spread. The absence wasn't advancing like a fleet. It was expanding like a condition. And every projection updated accordingly. Time remaining shortened. Outcome remained the same. Pull human historical archives. One of the senior strategists ordered abruptly. On what parameter? Unknown threat responses. Non-standard warfare. Anything they've documented but never used. The request triggered a cascade of restricted files. Decades, centuries of observational records humanity had quietly contributed to shared databases. Most had been ignored. Until now, patterns began to emerge. Wait, the archivist said, scrolling rapidly. These aren't random observations. What are they? Case studies. The room leaned in. Multiple entries. The archivist continued. Different species. Different regions. Similar collapse patterns, command breakdown, system desynchronization, loss without direct engagement. A long silence followed. How old are these? The archivist checked. Some of them predate first contact with us. That landed harder than anything else. They've seen this before, someone whispered. No, the analyst corrected again, voice tightening. They've been studying it. The countdown dropped to single digits. 9 hours. 8. 7. The object continued its approach, unchanged, unhurried, not adjusting course, not responding to the spreading collapse ahead, as if it already knew exactly where it needed to be. New projection. The simulation core announced. The chamber turned. Based on updated behavioral modeling, the system continued, incorporating unknown variable introduced by human asset. Outcome, the council demanded. A pause. Longer than any machine pause should be. Then, outcome cannot be determined. That had never happened before. Not once. Not in any recorded simulation. 6 hours remaining. And for the first time since the systems began disappearing, the galaxy was no longer certain how this ended, which somehow felt even worse. The object arrived exactly when the message said it would. Not early, not late, not even a fraction out of alignment. It didn't decelerate into the system the way ships normally did. There was no visible adjustment, no transition curve. One moment, long-range sensors registered its approach at the edge of detectable space. The next, it was simply there, inside the perimeter, close enough to be seen. For a few seconds, no one in the command array spoke, because the visual feed didn't resolve into anything familiar. It wasn't shaped like a warship. It wasn't shaped like anything. The structure, if it could be called that, was smooth, uninterrupted, almost featureless. No visible segmentation. No external modules. No weapon arrays. No identifiable command bridge. It didn't reflect light the way matter should. It absorbed it, bent it slightly, as though the surface wasn't entirely agreeing to be observed. Scale, someone asked. Larger than a capital ship, the sensor division replied. But inconsistent. Dimensions fluctuate depending on angle. That's not possible. It's what we're reading. Silence followed. Then a new signal appeared. Direct, unencrypted. From the object. This is Command Interface 7, the transmission said. The voice was human. Flat, neutral, not unfriendly, but not performing diplomacy either. This channel is sufficient. The council hesitated. Of all the things they had expected, this wasn't one of them. No introduction. No acknowledgement of the situation. No request for briefing. Just presence. This is a unified council. One of the representatives responded carefully. We transmitted a full strategic overview. Did you receive? Yes. The interruption wasn't abrupt. Just final. Another pause. You understand the scale of the threat? The council pressed. Yes. And your response is a single deployment? Yes. The word echoed harder this time. Something shifted in the room. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief reaching its limit. You cannot engage this enemy alone, one of the senior commanders said. We have lost over 90% of our operational capacity attempting direct and indirect engagements. We have run every viable scenario. Yes, the voice replied. Another interruption. Still calm. Still unhurried. Your models are accurate, it continued, given your assumptions. That landed. What assumptions? The analyst demanded. A brief pause. Then, that the conflict is being correctly defined. The room went still, because that wasn't a disagreement. That was a dismantling. You're suggesting we don't understand the enemy? Someone asked. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. You describe an external force acting on your systems. The voice continued. That is not precise. Then define it, the council demanded. A longer pause this time. Not hesitation. Processing. Then, no. That broke the rhythm. You refuse to explain? The commander snapped. Explanation at this stage would not improve your outcomes. That's not your decision to make. It is, the voice replied evenly, because you cannot act on the explanation. The chamber tightened. This wasn't how alliances worked. This wasn't how assistance worked. You were asked to help us, the council said, voice colder now. Not evaluate us. Correct, the voice replied. And I am helping. Another pause. Then, transmit full live telemetry from your last 3 collapses. The request came out of nowhere. Why? The analyst asked. Because your summary data is insufficient. We provided full tactical records. You provided conclusions, the voice corrected, not raw state transitions. That distinction hit harder than it should have, because it implied something uncomfortable. They had filtered their own data. There was hesitation. Then, slowly, the council authorized a transfer. Entire system logs, command sequences, targeting feedback loops, sensor inconsistencies, everything, unprocessed. The transmission took seconds. The response took less. Analysis complete, the voice said. That fast? That's not possible, someone muttered. It is done, the voice replied. Another pause. Then, you are not being defeated. The chamber froze. What? The council asked. You are not being opposed in the way your models assume, the voice continued. You are being corrected. That word again, same as the strategist had said earlier, but now it sounded worse. Define corrected, the analyst demanded. A pause. Then, carefully, your systems are being forced into states that invalidate your own decision structures. That's just another way of saying we're losing control. Yes. Then how is that not defeat? Because the objective is not destruction, the voice replied. Destruction is a byproduct. Silence. Heavy. Unsettled. You've been trying to outmaneuver something that isn't maneuvering, the voice continued. You've been applying adversarial models to a non-adversarial process. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to, the voice said. It only has to be true. The council chamber had no answer for that, because every strategy they had built assumed opposition, conflict, reaction. But if the thing they were facing didn't operate on those rules, then none of their strategies had ever mattered. What do you propose? The council finally asked. A longer pause. Then, I will proceed with intervention. You still haven't explained how. No. You haven't outlined a strategy. No. You haven't even identified the enemy. No. The frustration in the room peaked. Then what exactly are you doing? The commander demanded. For the first time, there was the slightest shift in the voice. Not emotion. Precision. I am removing the condition that allows this process to continue. That was not reassuring. Allied forces will prepare support formations, the commander said quickly. We can coordinate. No. The interruption was immediate this time. Support formations will accelerate failure. That's an assumption. No, the voice replied. That is observed. The room went quiet again, because deep down, they knew it might be true. Every large-scale response had failed faster than smaller ones. You will not engage, the voice continued. You will observe. That's not acceptable, someone said. It is necessary. Another pause. Then, finally, intervention begins in 11 minutes. The channel closed. No farewell. No confirmation. Just ended. On the main display, the object shifted. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But every sensor in the system registered the same change at once. It had begun. And no one in the chamber understood what that meant, which made it worse than anything that happened so far. Because for the first time, they weren't just losing the war. They didn't even understand what the war was anymore. The countdown did not appear on any official display. No system generated it. No command authorized it. And yet everyone in the chamber felt it. 11 minutes. That was all the warning they had been given. The object, the asset, had not moved in any visible way. It still occupied the same region of space relative to the system's core, suspended in a position that should have required constant micro-adjustments to maintain. But it didn't adjust. It simply remained, as if the concept of drift didn't apply to it. Track its trajectory. The command tier ordered. We can't, the sensor division replied. Why not? Because it doesn't have one. That answer didn't make sense. So they forced it to. Everything has a trajectory. Not if it isn't transitioning between positions. The analyst said, it's not moving through space. It's selecting positions within it. Silence. Again, the kind that came faster now. Enemy expansion update. Another voice cut in. The map shifted. More systems dimmed. But this time, the pattern was different. It wasn't spreading evenly anymore. It was bending, curving inward toward the asset. It's reacting, someone said. No, the analyst replied, eyes locked on the data. It doesn't react. Then explain that. A pause. Then, it's being influenced. That was worse. Timed projected system collapse. 3 hours. The simulation core announced. That's impossible, the council snapped. We had over 9. You had 9 under previous conditions. And now, a brief hesitation. Then, Conditions have changed. The room turned, almost as one, toward the displays showing the human asset. Contact them, the commander ordered. Channel is closed. Reopen it. We can't. Why not? Because they didn't terminate the channel. The communications officer said slowly. They removed it. That wasn't how communication systems worked. You could block, encrypt, reroute, but you couldn't erase a channel from existence. And yet every attempt to reconnect returned the same result. No valid endpoint. They've isolated themselves, someone said. No, the analyst corrected. They've isolated us. That distinction mattered, because it meant something had just changed in the structure of the battlefield itself. Prepare support formations, the commander ordered, voice tightening. We cannot let them engage alone, even if their strategy is sound. Redundancy. Stop. The interruption came from the simulation core. Not a voice, a system override. That had never happened before. Explain, the council demanded. Updated projections. The system responded, incorporating human asset as active variable. Outcome, a pause, longer this time. Then, any additional allied deployment increases failure probability to 100%. The words landed like impact. That's not possible, the commander said immediately. Support always improves. Not in this model, the system replied. Run it again. It has been run 4,912 times. And every result is the same? Yes. Silence. Then define failure. A beat. Then total systemic collapse. Accelerated timeline. No one spoke, because they all understood what that meant. If they interfered, they wouldn't delay extinction. They would cause it sooner. That's a projection, someone said finally, not a certainty. All projections are probabilities. The analyst replied quietly, but we've never seen convergence like this. How convergent? Another pause. Then zero variance. That ended the argument, not because they agreed, but because there was nothing left to say. Enemy expansion accelerating, the tactical observer reported. The map confirmed it. The dimming wasn't spreading anymore. It was surging, as if the presence of the asset had changed something fundamental. It's getting worse, someone whispered. No, the analyst said again, softer this time. It's getting closer. The difference mattered, but not in a comforting way. Time to engagement? The council asked. 6 minutes, the system replied. No one moved. No commands were issued. No fleets repositioned. For the first time in the history of the council, there was nothing they could do. On the main display, the asset changed. Not shape, not position. Something deeper. Every sensor in the system registered a simultaneous shift in state. Not energy, not mass. Something else. Something the systems couldn't categorize. What is it doing? The commander asked. No one answered, because no one knew. 3 minutes. The expanding absence reached the outer boundary of the system. Sensors flickered. Command signals stuttered. For a brief moment, the chamber itself felt it. Systems lagging. Displays correcting themselves. Minor inconsistencies creeping into control processes. The same pattern. The same failure. It's here, someone said. 2 minutes. The asset remained still. Unmoving. Unresponsive. As if waiting. 1 minute. The system announced. The chamber held its breath. Then, everything stopped. Not the way systems fail. Not the way signals collapse. Stopped. Cleanly. Completely. The map froze. The expansion halted mid-motion. The dimming ceased. Every process, enemy, allied, environmental, paused in a state that should not have been stable. What just happened? The council demanded. No response. No data. No explanation. Then the simulation core spoke. Not as an alert. Not as a projection. As something else. Something it had never done before. New condition detected. A pause. Then, engagement has begun. For a moment that stretched too long to measure, nothing existed in motion. Not the fleets. Not the systems. Not even the collapse. Every process that had been accelerating toward extinction simply stopped, not degraded, not interrupted, paused. Perfectly. Status, the council demanded. No answer came, not because systems had failed, but because systems had nothing to report. There was no change to track, no transition to measure. Every reading returned the same result. State, constant, except one. Tracking anomaly, the sensor division said, voice tightening. The main display shifted, centered, focused on the human asset. It was still there, still present, still occupying space. But unlike everything else, it was not frozen. That's not possible, someone whispered, because everything else was. Every star, every ship, every signal, locked in a single frame of existence. And yet, the asset moved, not forward, not through space, but between states. It appeared slightly offset from its previous position, not along a trajectory, but across possibilities, as if it were selecting where it had always been. Explain, the council demanded. No one could. Comparison scan, the analyst ordered. The system complied, overlaying previous states with current observation. The result made no sense. It's not moving relative to space, the analyst said slowly. It's moving relative to resolution. That word lingered, because it implied something dangerous. Reality itself was being recalculated. Enemy activity? The commander asked. None. None. Zero. That's not possible. The collapse is not progressing. The map confirmed it. The dimming had stopped mid-expansion. Entire regions frozen between existence and absence, like something had interrupted the process before it could complete. Then we have a window, someone said. Negative. The simulation core replied immediately. All projections suspended. Why? A pause. Then, no valid model. That had happened once before. But this time, it wasn't uncertainty. It was something else. Explain. Another pause. Then, system parameters have changed beyond defined conditions. The room didn't understand that, but they felt it. The asset shifted again. Subtly, deliberately, and for the first time, the collapse reacted. Not by advancing, not by resisting, but by failing. A section of dim space flickered, not back to full existence, but away from absence, as if the process that had removed it lost consistency. That's reversal, the analyst said, barely containing it. No, another corrected. It's instability. That difference mattered, because reversal meant victory. Instability meant something else, something unfinished. New readings. The sensor division reported rapidly. The collapse pattern is fragmenting. Define fragmenting. It's no longer uniform. Sections are desynchronizing from each other. The map updated. What had once been a smooth, expanding front was now breaking into uneven segments. Disconnected. Out of phase. What did the asset do? The council asked. No answer. But the analyst was already working. Cross-referencing. Comparing. Searching for anything that made sense. Then they found it. Look at this. The analyst said, pulling up a layered data stream. Raw telemetry. Unfiltered. From the moment the freeze began. At first, it looked like noise. Then patterns emerged. Micro-adjustments. Not to position. Not to energy output. But to something deeper. State variables. The analyst whispered. It's modifying state variables. Of what? A pause. Then, slowly, of the system itself. That realization hit harder than anything before it, because it meant the asset wasn't fighting the enemy. It was changing the environment the enemy depended on. Explain, the commander said. The analyst struggled, not for lack of understanding, but because the explanation didn't fit existing language. The collapse is an attack, they said finally. It's a resolution process. Silence. It's taking inconsistent systems and forcing them into a stable state. The analyst continued. A state that does include us. That word again. Correction. And the asset? The council pressed. It's introducing inconsistency. The room went still. On purpose, the analyst added. Everything clicked, and nothing made sense. You're saying the enemy requires consistency to function, the commander said slowly. Yes. And the asset is breaking that consistency? Yes. A pause. Then, why hasn't that worked before? The analyst didn't answer immediately, because the answer was uncomfortable, because we've always behaved consistently. That landed hard. Every strategy, every response, every defensive maneuver, predictable, modelable, logical, exactly what the enemy needed. But the asset isn't following those patterns, the analyst continued. It's not optimizing for survival. It's not optimizing for efficiency. It's not even optimizing for victory. Then what is it optimizing for? The council demanded. A long pause. Then, disruption. The word echoed. On the display, the asset moved again. And this time, a section of collapsed space didn't just flicker. It returned. Fully, abruptly, as if it had never been removed. The chamber inhaled as one. Is that stable? Someone asked. The system checked. Paused. Then, unknown. Of course it was. Enemy response, the commander asked. For the first time since the engagement began, there was one, not movement, not expansion, hesitation, the collapse, wherever it was, stalled across the entire map. Not because it was stopped, but because it no longer knew how to proceed. And in that moment, the council understood something they were not ready to understand. They had not been losing a war. They had been solving it incorrectly. And the human asset was not trying to win. It was breaking the rules of the system itself. On the display, another region returned. Then another, not smoothly, not cleanly, but unpredictably. The collapse fractured further. What happens if it fails? Someone asked quietly. No one answered, because for the first time, failure didn't mean defeat. It meant something worse. It meant the system would resolve again. And next time, it might not hesitate. The freeze didn't hold. Not completely. At first, it looked like it would. The asset moved. The collapse fractured. Sections of space returned, unstable but present. The system, whatever governed it, seemed to hesitate, unable to resolve the contradiction being introduced. For a moment, it felt like control had shifted. Then reality started moving again. Not smoothly, not all at once. In pieces. Temporal flow resuming. The system reported, voice strained in a way no system should sound. Rate. Inconsistent. The display confirmed it. Some regions snapped forward. Stars flickering through seconds of existence in less than a moment. Others lagged, dragging behind as if caught in resistance. A few remained locked, frozen in that impossible pause. Stability index? The council demanded. A delay. Then, degrading. That word cut deeper than anything before, because stability was the only thing holding the system together now, and the asset was actively destroying it. It's too much, one of the analysts said. The inconsistencies are spreading beyond the collapse zone. The map updated again. What had once been contained was no longer. The disruptions were leaking outward, not as absence, but as error. Ships flickered between positions. Signals duplicated, then contradicted themselves. Navigation arrays began reporting multiple valid coordinates for the same location. This isn't just affecting the enemy anymore, the commander said. No, the analyst replied quietly. It's affecting everything. The realization settled in slowly. The asset wasn't just breaking the collapse. It was breaking the system the collapse existed within. Can it be contained? The council asked. No answer. Because the question assumed something they were no longer sure of, that containment was even possible. On the display, the asset shifted again, faster now, more frequently, each movement creating new inconsistencies, new fractures, and the collapse reacted not by retreating, not by advancing, by changing. New pattern detected. The system warned. The map adjusted. What had once been a single expanding front split, multiple resolution points forming simultaneously. It's adapting, someone said. No, the analyst replied. It's compensating. That was worse, because adaptation meant learning. Compensation meant the system was rewriting itself to maintain function. Projection update. The simulation core announced. The chamber turned instantly. Outcome, a pause. Then, indeterminate. That's not new. This is, the system replied. Another pause. Then, probability of total system collapse. Rising. Silence. Define total system collapse, the council said carefully. A longer pause this time. Then, loss of coherent state across all regions. That meant everything. Not just the collapse. Not just the enemy. Everything. Stars. Systems. Space itself. All subject to the same correction. We need to stop this, the commander said immediately. Intervention? Someone asked. No, the analyst snapped. That's still a failure condition. Then what? No one had an answer. For the first time, victory and extinction looked the same. A signal broke through. Weak, fragmented, but unmistakable. Human channel reestablished. The communications officer said, startled. Put it through, the council ordered instantly. Static, then the same voice. Status acknowledged. That's all you have to say? The commander demanded. The system is destabilizing. Your actions are spreading beyond the collapse. If this continues. Yes, the voice replied. Still calm, still controlled. Then stop, the council said. You've proven the concept. We can stabilize from here. No, that word hit harder than before. You are exceeding acceptable thresholds, the analyst added urgently. The system cannot maintain coherence at this rate of inconsistency. Yes. Then why continue? A pause, not hesitation, consideration. Then, because it is not yet broken. The room froze again. What isn't? The council asked. The condition, the voice replied. That word again. Always that word. You're risking total collapse, the commander said. No, the voice corrected. I am preventing it. That made no sense. The system is attempting to re-resolve, the voice continued. If it succeeds while coherence is intact, the correction will complete. And that means you will be removed. Silence. So you're destroying the system to stop that from happening? The analyst asked. No, the voice said. Another pause. Then, I am forcing it to fail. The distinction mattered, even if they didn't fully understand why. On the display, the asset surged, not forward, not faster, deeper. Its position shifted into regions that hadn't yet fully resolved. Zones of partial absence, incomplete states. That's not stable space, the analyst warned. Yes, the voice replied. Then it can't survive there. A pause. Then, survival is not the objective. That line changed everything. Because now, the pattern was clear. The asset wasn't trying to endure. It wasn't trying to win. It was trying to push the system past the point where it could recover. Probability update, the simulation core announced. The chamber turned again. Outcome, a pause, longer than any before. Then, system resolution failure approaching, threshold. Define threshold. Another pause. Then, irreversible. The word echoed. On the display, the collapse stuttered, flickered, paused, then surged again, but not cleanly, not uniformly. Broken, fragmented, uncertain. For the first time, the system itself didn't know what it was becoming, and the asset kept pushing. What happens when it reaches that threshold? Someone asked quietly. No one answered, because whatever came next was something no one had ever seen before, and there would be no model to predict it. The threshold came without warning. There was no signal, no announcement, no clear transition from approaching to reached. One moment, the system was unstable. The next, it stopped trying to be stable at all. Status, the council began. The system didn't respond, not because it failed, because the concept of status no longer applied. The map shattered, not visually, but logically. Regions of space no longer aligned with themselves. Coordinates overlapped. Distances contradicted. Entire star systems existed in multiple positions simultaneously. Then none. This is collapse, someone said. No, the analyst whispered. This is everything collapsing. Not just the enemy, not just the correction. Reality. Signal integrity failing. The communications officer reported. Navigation coherence loss. Temporal sequencing unstable. The chamber itself flickered. Not physically, but perceptually. For a fraction of a second, everyone saw the room from slightly different angles. At the same time, then it snapped back. That's not survivable, the commander said. And for once, no one argued. On the display, the asset still moved. Even here, even inside this impossible fragmentation. How? Someone breathed. Because nothing else could. Nothing else was even consistent enough to exist. And yet the asset continued. Not faster, not more aggressively. Precisely. Each movement now was smaller, more deliberate, as if it were navigating something far more complex than space. It's targeting something, analysts said. What? A pause. Then, they're not just breaking the system. Another pause. Longer. Then, they're isolating the failure. That didn't make sense. Until it did. Look at the collapse zones, the analyst said, pulling fragmented data together. They're not spreading anymore. The map, broken as it was, showed it. The collapse wasn't expanding. It was condensing, drawing inward toward a central point. What is it doing? The council demanded. The answer came not from analysis, but from observation. The asset shifted again, and for the first time, the collapse reacted instantly. Not hesitation, not compensation. Panic, if a system could panic. This was it. All fragmented regions began pulling toward the same location. Not smoothly, not cleanly, violently. It's try to resolve everything at once. The analyst realized. That was the final move. The system, whatever it was, had reached a conclusion. If it couldn't correct inconsistencies individually, it would override all of them simultaneously. A full system reset. Probability, the council demanded. The simulation core struggled. Then, for the first time, it failed. No answer. Projection unavailable. Because there was no model for this. This is it, the commander said. If it completes that process. No one needed to finish the sentence. Everything ends. On the display, the collapse converged. All absence, all instability, all contradiction, folding into a single point. And at the center, the asset. That's not survivable, someone whispered again. This time, they were wrong. Because survival was never part of the plan. The asset didn't retreat, didn't resist. It moved forward, directly into the convergence point. No, someone started. Too late. The moment the asset entered, everything stopped. Not paused, not frozen. Stopped. Completely. No flicker. No instability. No contradiction. Just stillness. Absolute. For a fraction of a moment that felt like infinity, nothing existed. Then the point collapsed. Not outward. Not explosively. Inward. As if the system had tried to resolve itself, and instead erased the process entirely. The map returned. Clean. No dimming. No fragmentation. No distortion. Every system. Present. Every signal. Stable. Every coordinate. Consistent. Enemy activity? The council demanded. The system scanned. Paused. Then, no detection. Silence. Confirm. Another scan. Deeper. More precise. Then, no presence. The words didn't land immediately, because they didn't make sense. No presence, the commander repeated. Yes. Gone. A pause. Then, undefined. That was worse, because it didn't mean destroyed. It meant the system no longer recognized it as something that could exist. The collapse, the correction, the entire process was no longer valid. On the display, one signal remained. The asset, damaged, fragmented, barely stable, but still there. And for the first time, it stopped moving. The chamber watched in silence. because no one knew what they had just witnessed. Only one thing was certain: the war hadn't been won. It had been removed. And whatever humanity had just done was not something the galaxy understood. The silence after the event felt different. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of loss, the silence of something that had ended without anyone fully understanding how. The map held steady. No dimming, no distortion, no fragmentation. Every system that had been lost, every region that had flickered between existence and absence, now appeared stable, complete, as if nothing had ever happened. "That's not possible," one of the analysts said, almost reflexively, but no one corrected them, because that had stopped meaning anything. "Verification sweep," the council ordered. The systems complied. Deep scans, multi-layered analysis, temporal consistency checks, reality validation protocols, and used for centuries, reactivated and deployed across every sector. The results came back the same. Again and again, no anomaly detected. Search for residual patterns, the council pushed. Anything, energy signatures, structural remnants, data echoes. The system paused longer than usual, then responded. No trace of prior condition. The words settled heavily. Not enemy destroyed, not enemy retreated. No trace, as if the collapse, the correction, had never existed within the system at all. "That's not a victory," someone said quietly. No, it wasn't, because victories leave evidence. This left nothing on the display. One signal remained. The asset, still present, still barely coherent. Its structure now visibly degraded, sections of it no longer aligning correctly with themselves. Parts flickered in and out of resolution, as if the system hadn't fully decided how it should exist. "Status of the human asset?" the commander asked. The system attempted to respond. Failed. Tried again. Then, state unstable. Persistence unknown. Can it be recovered? No answer. Before the question could be pushed further, the channel reopened. No signal request. No handshake. It simply existed again. "This is Command Interface 7. The same voice. Unchanged. The chamber reacted immediately. "What happened?" the council demanded. "Define the engagement. Define the outcome. What was that system? Where did it go?" A pause. Then, "It is no longer applicable." That's not an answer. It is sufficient. The tension returned, but different now. Less desperate. More focused. "You removed it," the analyst said carefully. "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I invalidated the condition required for its operation." Silence. "That's not a distinction," the commander said. "It is," the voice replied. Another pause. Then, "You were modeling it as an adversary." Yes, that model was incorrect. "We understand that now," the council said. Then explain what it actually was. A longer pause this time. Not reluctance. Precision. It was a resolution system. The voice said, "Designed to enforce consistency across complex states." "Consistency," the analyst echoed. "Yes." Another pause. "You were inconsistent," the voice continued. "Multiple competing decision layers. Conflicting logic structures. Non-convergent behaviors. That's every civilization," someone said. Yes. The simplicity of the answer made it worse. "Then why weren't we removed before?" the council demanded. A pause. Then, "You were below threshold." That word again. "And now, you were not." The chamber absorbed that slowly. "You're saying we reached a point where the system activated?" the analyst asked. "Yes." "And you've seen this before?" A pause. Then, "Yes." That changed everything. "How many times?" the council asked. The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, enough to prepare. Silence. The implication spread to the chamber like something alive. "You knew this was coming," the commander said. "Yes." "And you waited?" A pause. Then, "Yes." The word hit harder than any before. "Why?" the council demanded. The longest pause yet. Then, Because intervention before threshold does not prevent activation. That wasn't the full answer. Then why respond now? The analyst pressed. Another pause. Then, because now you could not survive without it. The chamber stilled. That was the difference. Not capability. Necessity. You waited until we had no other option, the commander said slowly. Yes. No apology. No justification. Just truth. And if we had never asked? The council asked. A pause. Then, you would have been removed. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. On the display, the asset flickered. More violently now. Your system is destabilizing, the analyst said quickly. You need extraction. Negative. That word again. Final. Then what happens to you? The council asked. A pause. Then, function complete. The signal began to degrade. Wait, the council said. We need to understand. You do not. The interruption was softer this time. Understanding does not improve your outcome. That's not your decision. It is... The signal fractured. One last moment of clarity. Then, condition resolved. The channel vanished. Not disconnected. Gone. On the display, the asset collapsed. Not explosively. Not dramatically. Quietly. Its structure losing coherence. Fading. Until it no longer registered as an object. Only absence. But not the same absence as before. This one was empty. The chamber stood in silence. The war was over, but no one celebrated, because they had learned something they couldn't unlearn. The galaxy had not been saved by strength, or numbers, or even strategy. It had been saved by something else entirely. Something patient, something that watched, something that waited, until the exact moment intervention would matter, and acted with precision so absolute that it didn't just win the war. It removed the possibility of losing it. On the restored map, everything was blue again, but it felt different now. Not safe, not secure, just observed. And somewhere beyond what they could measure, the Council understood one final, quiet truth. What humanity had shown them was not everything they could do.